Poop, excrement, that one S word I can't say in the first 30 seconds of the video or YouTube will demonetize me, is a thing we all do at least once a day. Unless you're either severely constipated or you're purely subsisting on 20-cent ramen bricks, which at this point is completely understandable. It's something that unites us all, whether you're just a normal person or a lizard demon trying to blend into society. But once you're done with your business and press that flush button, where does it actually go? Well, the answer is pipes, lots of them, deep underneath every city, all connected to each other. Some people call it the sewer system, and by some people I mean everyone, because that's what it's called. But this complicated, organized system didn't just appear out of nowhere. It took centuries of development for us to figure this out, and there's definitely been a lot of fun stories along the way. So without further ado, let's talk about the poop problems of history. Now unsurprisingly, humans have been shitting for a very long time, ever since we came into existence. But the idea of sanitation is much more recent. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans have been enjoying the freedom to do their business wherever they want, just like nature intended. But then some fuckers decided to work together, and that eventually led to settlements and housing and agriculture and communities and society as a whole. And all of a sudden, you couldn't take a simple dump in public without people throwing around words like unsanitary and this is my grandmother's funeral. The bacteria in poop caused diseases in people. And as we started living together in bigger and bigger groups, dealing with our waste became more and more of a problem, as these diseases spread faster when there's more people around. So it wasn't long until we decided to do something about it. The very first toilets were just holes in the ground that you covered up after you were done. The first flushing toilet was probably invented in Greece, on the island of Crete by the Minoans, although similar designs were also found in other places. These guys lived on hilly slopes, so they were able to build pipes and use gravity to get flowing water. These were basically holes with flowing water underneath, and they even had sinks with flowing water, although the sink and the toilet water came from the same pipe, so I'd be a bit cautious on that one. They didn't have toilet paper though, and they instead used small stones to wipe their ass, which is somehow not the worst thing in this video. The idea spread to other parts of Greece too, and once the Romans took over a few hundred years later, they ended up borrowing the idea too. The Romans had similar toilet designs with flowing water, and of course, they had to include the best part, the toilet stones. But if you were rich enough, you had the luxury of cleaning your ass the elite way, with a wet sponge on a stick that was cleaned in a bucket of water. Yeah, your options weren't looking too good here, but at least in Rome, you wouldn't have to suffer alone, because apparently in Rome, going to the bathroom was considered a community activity. Their public toilets had absolutely no doors or stalls, and they were considered a place to meet and catch up with friends, because there's no better place for conversation than next to a guy absolutely shitting his brains out. And yes, just in case you weren't feeling the community spirit already, everyone had to use the same sponge on a stick. But this community spirit didn't end so well for some German nobles in a church in 1184. They were meeting here to negotiate some military stuff when their combined weight caused the wooden floor under them to collapse, resulting in the deaths of at least 60 people by drowning in human waste. At home though, people just used regular old pots which would be emptied every day. The Romans didn't waste any of this though, and every week they collected everyone's pee and used it to wash their clothes. The reason behind this was that human pee contains ammonia, and ammonia was apparently pretty good at getting stains out of clothes. So there was some actual science behind this, but all I want to know is what the Romans were doing in their free time to figure that one out. Now fast forward to medieval times, and the poop problems have only gotten worse. After the fall of the Roman Empire, the water-flowing toilet design was mostly lost, and although it was still used in some places, it wasn't very practical for large cities. And I don't think a medieval peasant who couldn't afford to feed his 8 kids was gonna be pulling up with a fancy new pipe system anytime soon. For example, the sanitation situation in medieval England was pretty shitty, to say the least. The Romans did build a pretty good system of drains and aqueducts in London back during the Roman Empire, but it had fallen into disrepair and wasn't used anymore. Like many things at the time, the facilities people got were very different depending on whether you were rich or poor. The rich had a room in their mansion or castle called the garderobe. This was basically a room slightly further away from the rest of the house, placed right over a moat or a pit with a hole at the bottom. Someone would do their business, gravity would do its thing, and suddenly, your waste becomes a poor person's problem. These poor people were called Gong Farmers, which is a pretty shitty name for a pretty shitty job. Their job was to manually clean out these pits and moats and cart off the waste to dispose of it. Although their job paid pretty well in medieval standards, it definitely wasn't enough to make up for the long hours they spent, sometimes up to their necks in waste. Plus, they could only work late at night, from 9 PM to 5 AM, because their work was considered dirty and unclean. And they were also only allowed to live in specific parts of the city away from everyone else. Because nothing makes your life as a poop cleaner better than being shit on by people, both literally and metaphorically. And in case being bullied by their entire city wasn't bad enough, the poisonous gases from these cesspits would sometimes cause them to suffocate to death. And since this was medieval times, you know there was at least a little child labor involved. Oh, and one more thing, those poisonous gases from the pits also happened to be flammable. I'm sure that didn't lead to any problems or anything. But if you were too poor to afford even a single mansion, you had a lot less luxury. The city had both public and private toilets, but these were basically just glorified holes in the ground where waste was collected. Digging a cesspit for your waste was pretty expensive back then, so most people either used the public ones or just dumped their waste wherever they could. Some of them did it in public waste disposal places, but many others who were too lazy and didn't care enough just did it in the streets. The streets back then were already filled with dirt, mud, horse poop, and a bunch of other stuff, so it's not like this would make a huge difference. So once you were done with your business, you just pop the window open, and suddenly your waste becomes a passerby's problem. Plus, if you had to pee in the middle of the night, going outside to a public toilet in pitch darkness in medieval London could be the last thing you ever do, as a certain John the Abingdon found out the hard way in 1290. So most people just opted to throw it out of their windows instead. So this system went on for a while until the year 1775, when the first modern flushing toilet was invented by a guy called Alexander Cumming. Although similar ideas and designs were made in the past in many different places, this was the first patented model, and after some improvements by a guy called Thomas Crapper, these toilets became widely successful in England. By this point, a pretty good system of sewer pipes were constructed in London to properly deal with the waste, so along with those, the poop problems that England was facing were finally sorted out. Except for one tiny detail. Whether you were rich or poor, whether you threw it out of your window or responsibly disposed of it in the community shitbit, whether you were using one of those newfangled flushing toilets, all of London's waste in the end still ended up in the same place. The Gong Farmers who cleaned out the cesspits dumped their waste here. The sewer pipes in the city all emptied into here. Even the rain that washed away the streets of London made its way here. You guessed it, it's the River Thames. Now the Thames was always used as a dumping ground for waste for many years in London without any problems. But as the population grew and the city got bigger, it became increasingly apparent that dumping everyone's waste in the same spot wasn't a very long-term idea. The river that was once described as silver and clear was now so muddy and brown that you could only see an inch into the surface. And when the high tide hit, all that waste rushed right back into the city. The worst part was that the Thames served as a main source of drinking water for all of London. Because nothing says great British cuisine than a tall glass of poop water the first thing in the morning. And if you thought that the water from the wells was safe, remember those cesspits from before? Well, they had a pretty bad habit of leaking into nearby underground sources of water and contaminating them. So the entire city of London had no choice but to drink their daily dose of fecal bacteria. This obviously led to multiple cholera outbreaks in the city, which ended up killing thousands of people. After these incidents, the London government obviously decided to work on the situation and clean up the Thames, bringing fresh water to the city and ending disease forever. I'm just kidding, of course. Cleaning the Thames would have taken hard work, dedication, planning, budgeting, and would have immensely helped the population of London. Unfortunately, that just so happens to be the government's worst nightmare. All they were concerned with at the time was finding the next small African country to turn into a sweatshop and completely financially decimate. So despite the pressure, and the bodies piling on, the problem still existed. But other than fatal diseases, poop also happens to cause something else. It smells really bad. And unlike the thousands of bodies, this was a lot harder to ignore. People were already complaining about this for a while now, but this reached its peak in 1858. It was the summer of 1858, and London's weather was reaching much higher temperatures than normal. This caused the Thames to become drier, while at the same time causing all of the stuff in the river to become a lot more pungent. So pungent, in fact, that it literally stopped the government from working. This was called the Great Stink, and it was the thing that convinced the government that, hey, maybe the metric fuckton of liquid biohazard pretending to be a river in the middle of our city might just maybe be a slight issue. The Parliament building was built right next to the river, and during the summer, the smell got so bad that the government officials could physically not stay in the building to do their work. They tried using curtains soaked in lime chloride to help get rid of the smell, but that did barely anything. The Queen also decided to go on a cruise on the river during the same time. She lasted a whole 10 minutes before she had to go back because of the smell. They even thought about moving the government building to get away from the smell. They tried pouring chemicals in the river so that they could actually breathe again, but they quickly realized that they actually had to do some real work about this. It was, pun fully intended, an absolute shit show. But at least it did lead to some positive consequences. After being slapped in the face, or I guess slapped in the nose, with the consequences of their actions, the government decided that the Thames might actually need a bit of cleaning. They started building new sewers which could actually handle the waste properly, and eventually, after a few years and a lot of money spent, the Thames managed to clear up and Londoners could finally stop dying of cholera. But more importantly, the Queen could finally go on her cruises again without any interruptions. As the years progressed, Britain got more factories due to the Industrial Revolution, and this allowed for the mass production of toilets. And now that London has a sewer system that could actually handle them, they exploded in popularity. The design was improved upon more and more by other people as its production and popularity spread even further. And since England at the time controlled pretty much the entire world, they managed to spread this new invention far and wide. Fast forward a few decades and here we are. Although we got all sorts of fancy add-ons like heated seats and speakers and whatever this abomination is, the basic design has still pretty much stayed the same. So moral of the story is, don't shit in the same water you drink. Also, the deaths of thousands of citizens doesn't matter as long as the government isn't directly affected. But, let's go with the first one. So yeah, those are some of the worst poop problems in history. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe, hit the bell, leave a comment, and watch another video by clicking right here. I'll see you guys later.